We appreciate it. Let's talk now with our panel, NBC News Capitol Hill colleague Sahil Kapur, former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman and NBC News political analyst Donna Edwards, and Brendan Buck, a former advisor to Republican Speaker John Boehner and Paul Ryan, as well as being an NBC News political analyst. So we didn't get to it with Shaq, but I want to talk about this campaign memo that was unearthed, that was kind of a way for the PAC, the DeSantis super PAC, to talk to the campaign itself. And Sahil, the highlights from this memo, Ron DeSantis, they suggest, needs to take a sledgehammer to Vivek Ramaswamy, the political newcomer who's rising in the polls, and that he should actually defend Donald Trump when Chris Christie inevitably attacks the president and then needs to attack Joe Biden and the media no less than 3 to 5 times. I mean, what does this tell you about the campaign?
It shows the extraordinary jam that the Ron DeSantis campaign is in right now. The fact that they have no answer for how to deal with Trump. They're leery of criticizing him for fear that they alienate Republican voters who are loyal to him. There's some leeriness of ignoring him as well because he's above 50% and running away with the nomination. And we should note that this was not a campaign product. This was by the super PAC. The campaign has sort of distanced itself from this memo. But it does show that the DeSantis orbit, the campaign is not going the way they wanted it to go. And if Donald Trump is not on the stage, one thing you can do is criticize him for not debating the way Chris Christie is doing. If you want to make your case, if you want to be president, at least show up. This memo suggests that, you know, they're leery of going down that road.
So from a strategic standpoint, Brendan, is Donald Trump making the right decision by skipping the debate and instead spending time with Tucker Carlson in whatever capacity that turns out to be?
Yeah, I don't blame him at all for it. I mean, he's obviously far ahead in the race, but also he seems to be the only person actually trying to win the race. You know, we'll see what happens on the debate stage, but it really feels like we're not actually having a campaign. And if Ron DeSantis, the closest alternative, is going to take a pass and is going to defend the person beating him, then what's the point? Why are we even doing this? And so if they're not actually going to run a campaign, if they're not actually going to come after him, why submit yourself to be there in the first place? I actually think it's the perfect right strategy.
Well, and what do you think about the RNC's role in all of this? We know that the chairwoman, Ronna McDaniel, made a personal plea to Donald Trump. There's some reporting out there that the executives from Fox News made an entry to try and convince him to be there. And Trump doesn't seem to care. Does the RNC have any power when it comes to the shepherding of this party?
And it's not a new thing either. I mean, it's been Donald Trump's party and infrastructure for a really long time, and she's tried to wrestle it back and give at least the appearance that there is a primary going on here. But I think we're squinting pretty hard to see an actual primary, and I think that he doesn't really need much of them. And I think all of those other people on the stage need Donald Trump much more than he needs them.
So, Donna, if you're one of these other Republicans on the stage, I know that might be difficult for you to try and put yourself in that place. But how do you handle that? Obviously, even though he won't be there, Donald Trump will be the proverbial elephant in the room. How do these Republican challengers to him try and find a way to break through without him there, but him being the most important topic?
Well, there you have it. Donald Trump is sucking up all the oxygen, whether he's on the stage or not. And I think for some of these candidates, to the extent, as Brenda said, that they are unwilling to go after Donald Trump, then it means that they're not willing to replace him. And I think voters will see that. And certainly Mr. Trump has seen that because he doesn't even see fit to show up on the stage with them. So, I mean, other than Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, who are not going anywhere in the polls, nobody else seems willing to take on the front runner, who is Donald Trump. And to the extent that they don't do that, there is no space for them to win this nomination.
I mean, I'm a little curious, if you decide you're going to run against Donald Trump, you know, what is there to lose by going after him on this debate stage? You've already said that you want to challenge him. You've already said you don't think he's the best nominee for president. Why is there any benefit to trying to just kiss up to him in a stage like this?
Well, I mean, that is the question that everyone's asking. And I think for those Republicans, you know, if you're a Republican voter, why would you vote for the look-alike when you can vote for the real thing? And I think that that's the position that they're in. And as long as those candidates, those other candidates, occupy that space, this is Donald Trump's nomination to run away with.
It's self-preservation. Ron DeSantis might want to run for president again someday. Right. Tim Scott probably needs to get reelected in South Carolina at some point. So they all have to think about their future. And it seems like a lot of these campaigns were really just banking on the idea that Donald Trump was going to self-destruct, he was going to implode, and then they'd be there. That's not happening. I don't know why you would think that, given the last 8 years, that would actually take place, but it's clearly not happening. And so now I think they're just worried about their own futures.
Some of them may also be running for vice president. Some of them also may be hoping that if they're nice to Donald Trump, he'll give them a position in what may be a second presidential term. But this is an absolute gift to Donald Trump to have the candidate with 15% attacking the candidate with 8%, the sledgehammer to the guy who's polling less than you and the guy who's above 50% and climbing, I should add, is not on the debate stage. He's in a dominant position right now. Sometimes it's hard to figure out who the more dominant candidate in their own primary is, Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
Right. Speaking of candidates that appear to remain insignificant in the Republican primary, let's see what the former Vice President Mike Pence had to say. He was at an event in Georgia today. This is what he said when he got off stage. Take a listen.
What impact do those false claims have on the Republican Party going forward?
Last question.
Well, honestly, I think Republican primary voters aren't interested in looking in the rearview mirror. There's too many challenges facing American families today.
So he's obviously responding to Trump's false election claims. He clearly had a hard time answering that question. Yeah. He's the one that's been in the line of fire the most on this, Brendan. How's he handling this? It's not seem to be helping him at all.
Well, he seems to be getting a little closer and closer to criticizing Donald Trump all the time. And that's the person I'm most interested in seeing on the debate stage. Does he sort of say, okay, this is my moment. This is not somebody who has to run for re-election for really anything ever again. Like, this is his one time to say, this is a person I stood next to for 4 years, and I can tell you he is not the right person to lead it. Here's why. No one has made that point. People are giving economic speeches. People are rolling out energy plans. No one has given a clear explanation for why Donald Trump should not be president. No one is better positioned to do that than Mike Pence. We'll see.
Okay, so Sahil, let's talk about the great reporting that you had this week with our colleague Alan Smith regarding the standoff in the Congress and the Senate over the confirmation of military promotions. You guys picked up some audio of Kyrsten Sinema in a private event in Arizona where she suggests, now remember she's an independent now, not a Democrat, but suggests that Tuberville and the administration need to find common ground when it comes to this DOD policy on paying for the travel of service members who are seeking abortions. What's her end game here? We know that she tries to be the great diplomat on the Senate floor. Can she pull it off in this regard?
It's hard to see how she pulls it off. It's quite a bold move for Sinema to wade into this standoff, which is entirely 100% about the Pentagon's travel policy as it relates to abortion. This has been going on for months now. The Secretary of Defense and Senator Tuberville have spoken on the phone several times. They have an irreconcilable difference over it. Now, Sinema at this private event, this was an invite-only event that Alan Smith and I obtained audio for. She talks about the need for both parties or both sides here to step off from their positions and find that middle ground to solve the challenge that we're facing. It's very hard to know what this looks like. It is on brand for Sinema to, present herself as an independent voice, to present herself as a bridge between the two parties to help solve problems. It is off-brand for her to break with Democrats on a fight that is ultimately about abortion. For all the headaches that she's given her party, she's been solidly in line with reproductive rights advocates on that issue. What her endgame is unclear. She's an independent now. She has not said whether she's running for re-election in Arizona, and if she does, she would have a challenging path. I asked her office repeatedly, what is this compromise? What does it look like? They won't say policy or process. They won't say what it is.
It's shocking that they didn't respond. That's a snarky comment for those of us that cover Capitol Hill every day. But I want to finish out with, I was in Montana at the beginning of this month and had the opportunity to sit down with Senator Jon Tester. We talked about a number of topics, but I asked him about the controversy surrounding the president's son, Hunter Biden. I want to play a little bit of that for you. So then I have to ask you about the president's son then, too. Do you view the situation with Hunter Biden in the same realm?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct.
Yeah.
If Hunter Biden broke the law, he needs to pay the price.
Yeah. And do you think that the current president has any connection to that from what you've been able to tell?
That's for somebody else to figure out. But
Yeah.
if that connection is there, then that's a problem.
So, Donna, he said if that connection is there, that is a problem. And that is what Republicans are really attempting to expose, right? They're filling the vacuum, the lack of information about possible ties between Hunter Biden's business dealings and the president, and trying to make it look nefarious, and as a result, try and damage the president politically. Does that have legs? Do independent voters see Hunter Biden's legal issues as a problem for the president and whether or not they might support him in 2024?
I don't think so. I mean, and I think to the extent that this never really touches Joe Biden, I mean, Republicans have been pretty aggressive at trying to figure out that connection, and it simply doesn't exist. And I agree with Jon Tester, and I think most Democrats do as well, that Hunter Biden's problems are his own legal problems and that they don't attach to the president. And And I just sort of feel like if Republicans want to continue barking down that path, there's no path to proceed. And the legal issues are going to work themselves out, and Hunter Biden is going to deal with those. But that doesn't mean that Joe Biden has a problem. Look, we've been through decades of presidents' relatives, sons and brothers, and et cetera. And those things do not attach to the president. And the president generally rises above all of that. I mean, we've seen repeated examples of that over our history. I don't think that's going to happen now.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Donna Edwards, Brendan Buck, Sahil Kapur, thank you all for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.